Namaste everyone, my name is Goyal and welcome to the last segment of this module. In the previous segments, we saw something rather unusual. By every conventional rule, economic, political, historical, India should not have survived as a single democratic nation. And yet it did. And so here's the real question. Why do people still feel like they belong to this idea of India, despite the messiness, the contradictions, the complexity, the diversity? If democracy alone doesn't explain India's unity, and if diversity hasn't led to disintegration, then maybe we need to look somewhere else. In this Anekta mein Ekta, we often focus on Anekta. We want to focus on Ekta. We've already seen institutions like constitutions, elections, federalism, they've all played a role. But they don't really tell the full story. And that's where we shift the focus. Away from institutions, away from statecraft, and towards something that runs deeper. The way people live. That is what we need to see if we need to understand India. A layer that might explain not just why India has stayed together, but also how has it stayed together. India is not one language, one religion, one ethnicity, or one region. Laws can create structure, but they can't create emotional connection. They don't explain why people who speak different languages, follow different customs, and live in different environments altogether still feel part of the same country. From Nagaland to Gujarat, Kashmir to Kanyakumari, there is a sense of familiarity even when we can't explain it. And where does that come from? This is where the idea of Jeevan Darshana comes in. Not as some abstract theory, but as something which people actually live by. It's a civilizational mindset, a way of looking at the world that shows up in everyday decisions, habits, and relationships. It's not loud or formal. It's functional. It's there. It's almost everywhere. You can think of it like some sort of an operating system beneath this India's visible diversity of things that are visible, tangible. And it's this idea that this course sets out to test. Not by surveying laws, not by tracing institutions, but by listening. How people farm, learn, pray, govern, and how do they tell stories. In this course, we'll explore everyday life of how people do everything that they do. They farm, they learn, they solve local problems, how they relate to everything around them. So the goal is not really to find one answer. It's to notice patterns that emerge when we slow down and look closely. Because it's often in these moments of reflection that something deeper comes into focus. What we begin to see when we do this is that despite all the visible diversity, there's a consistent cultural logic that is running through these practices. Not identical, but structured in a way that feels familiar across different regions. They call this the Bharatiya Jeevan Darshan, a living philosophy, a way of living that creates coherence without forcing uniformity. Jeevan Darshan, of course, means view of life, but in this context, not just religious idea or philosophical theory. It's a practical way of seeing the world. Most people don't even think about it consciously. They don't label it Jeevan Darshan. They just live by it. But it shapes how people across India, across the length and breadth of this country, make decisions, they solve problems, and relate to one another. And it definitely explains why, even with all the conflict, noise, and complexity, India did not fragment like many others expected. So why does this matter? Well, we often think of culture as things like food, festivals, clothing, music. Of course, these are part of culture. But in this course, we are looking at culture in a very different way. We're looking at it as a set of habits, values, way of thinking, way of living. The kind that shapes people organize their lives, daily lives. It shows up in how people make decisions, how they relate to each other, resolve conflict, what they learn, and how they pass this knowledge over generation through simple ancestral practice. It's not always visible. It's not even written down, but it influences what we see as normal, respectful, or meaningful in different communities. And that's far more durable than any single leader or law. It's far more flexible also. It allows for disagreements, it allows for differences, and it still creates a sense of connection. You may not speak the same language as someone across the country. Chances are you'll recognize how they show respect to the elders, how they treat guests, how they organize family rules, how they relate to nature, how they learn, how they govern themselves, how do they do their pujas as well as their daily jobs. That's the unity no one talks about. Now, Jeevan Darshan is not a single or a uniform idea. There are many ways of seeing and living in India, different philosophies that guide life in different regions, communities, and traditions. And so therefore, there could be hundreds of Jeevan Darshana. This course doesn't claim to cover them all. What we do here is we focus on 5 distinct expressions, 5 distinct Jeevan Darshana that appear across contexts and offer insights into deeper threads that we believe holds India together. We won't explore them in detail just yet. I mean, that's the work of next 5 modules, but each of those modules will focus on one major theme. The first one, our relationship with nature and agriculture. Nature is not a resource to exploit, but a living system that we are part of. Second, families and communities. The individual is not separate, but exists within networks of relationships and duties, families and communities. Third, sources and methods of learning. Knowledge is action-based, experience-driven, and passed socially. There is a way in which we recognize, understand knowledge through different types of relationships that we build within our learning spaces. Fourth, art and craft traditions. Art is not merely ornamental, it has an everyday value, it is sustained by communities, it's a way of life for people. Finally and fifthly, village self-governance. The Swaraj exists in decentralized, locally accountable governance. Villages have their own ways. In fact, not just villages, even cities have their own ways in which they govern. We will, of course, focus on the rural part. Each one of these modules will take a close look at how this worldview shows up, not just in ideas, but in real, everyday practices across India. And so this segment isn't a deep dive, it's the setup. We are giving you the lens, the map. The pieces will come together in the next modules. See you there. Namaste.